What you're looking at is all that remains of Pudding Lane, London, after the Great Fire of 1666. To put it mildly, it's pretty bad. So how did this happen? How did London almost burn to the ground? Well, let me tell you. It all started right here in this very spot when a baker accidentally left his oven on and went to bed. And by the next morning, this entire street and soon the entire city was a fiery inferno. It's a tale as old as time itself, or at least as old as the 17th century. So the year is 1666, and the place is London, city of around 500,000 people with not enough food, too much waste, and a serious housing shortage. Now, I don't know about you, but those sound like perfect conditions for a disaster movie. But we're not in a movie. This is real life. Things are about to get real. As I said, it all started in Pudding Lane with a baker who accidentally left his oven on. By the next morning, his shop was a fiery inferno, but nobody seemed to care because, well, it was Sunday. Apparently, nobody wanted to break the peace by putting out a fire on the Lord's Day. So the fire just kept burning and burning until Monday morning when people were like, "Oh yeah, there's a fire. Let's go and put that out." But by then it was too late. Now, luckily, the wind was blowing in this direction towards the river, which meant that most of London's most important buildings were safe. However, what wasn't safe was this entire street made almost entirely of wooden houses. And as the fire raged on, it just spread further and further until the entire street looked like this. So they tried to stop its path by pulling down these houses, but that didn't really work. In fact, it just gave the fire more oxygen and made it spread even faster. Soon, firefighters were running around like headless chickens, desperately trying to put out the blaze. But it was no use. The fire was just too intense, and even King Charles II had to escape for his own safety. He took shelter in this very house, which is now a museum. However, he didn't stay here for long. He got spooked by reports that Parliament was planning to kill him and fled to Normandy, France, where he stayed for 5 years until he could safely return to England. Meanwhile, the fire continued to rage until it finally died down 5 days later. But by then it had completely destroyed this entire area and killed around 5,000 people. It was a total disaster. But Londoners were determined to rebuild their city. They started by demolishing all of these burnt-out buildings, and then they invited a French architect named Robert Hooke to come and design a new street layout. And while his plan was initially rejected, it was eventually accepted and became the basis for London's rebuilding. See, before the fire, London was a warren of narrow streets and alleyways, which made it almost impossible to escape a fire once it started. But now, thanks to Hooke, London's streets were much wider, and there were also things like fire breaks and open spaces to prevent the spread of future fires. In other words, London was now a much safer city as a result of the Great Fire. And while it took around 5 years and a lot of money to rebuild, Londoners didn't complain. They knew that they had dodged a bullet. If the fire had started just a few streets over, it could have easily spread to Westminster, and the entire city could have burnt to the ground. So instead, they saw the fire as an opportunity to make London a better, safer city. Which is why today, instead of being known as the worst fire in history, it's actually known as one of the best things that ever happened to London. Thank you for watching.